If I can introduce Mari Williams from BBSRC, but RCUK, and hopefully going to talk to us a little bit about research outcomes and the work you do there, finding out about all these lovely articles that we produce on your behalf.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, and of course thank you for the opportunity to speak. And I will start by saying, follow that. Though actually, when the terms of the debate was set in gold versus green, or gold and green as the main discussion point, I thought about my presentation, and actually I haven't got anything in my slides about discussing the gold and green distinction. I will, of course, refer to it as we go along because it is written in the RCUK policy. But I do increasingly accept the point that this is a much more varied arena than has been allowed for in some of the formal policies. And I will also remind everybody that this is a moving landscape and that we are looking at the setup from a Research Council's point of view in a year's time. And everything we pick up on the way to that will be thought about quite hard, I think, as to how we go forward. So on that, let me just also say a little bit about the two hats. I do work for BBSRC in the policy and corporate policy and strategy part of BBSRC, but the way the research councils are managing our policy on open access, it's an RCUK policy, and we have a cross-council group of individuals from each of the councils who try to put our heads together around the issues that affect our communities and come to some conclusions about where we have ground in common, where we need to distinguish between what's happening in arts and humanities and the STEM subjects, and that's how we work. So yeah, I'm here speaking on behalf of RCUK. I'm happy to take questions. If they're council specific and they're not BBSRC, I will almost certainly have to refer you back, but I'm happy to take questions back with me. Okay, so what am I actually going to talk about? Never mind the rest of it. I do want to talk a little bit about the RCUK policy, the whys, what's and the hows, why we have a policy, what the policy covers, and how we are implementing the policy, broadly speaking. So if we think about the why, there's a quote on the screen there from Doug Kell, who it says the RCUK champion for information. I have to say that piece of information is now a week out of date, in that Professor Kell has moved back to the University of Manchester and is no longer Chief Executive of BBSRC and no longer playing this role for RCUK, therefore. We haven't yet identified who will be the champion going forward, but it is in hand. As you may imagine, these things in the research councils can take a little while. But I think this sets out the direction we were coming from and have sort of supported over the last few years. And that is we are really committed as public funders of research to making the outputs and outcomes from research easily available widely, not only to support the research community, of course that almost goes without saying because that's our business, but also to support the dissemination of research ideas and results as quickly as possible and freely as possible to the places where it can be helpful and actually take things forward. So just a little bit about the public dimension here. The research councils are one of the main funders of research in the universities and research institutes in the UK. The figure on the middle of that screen is the total allocation following the spending review in 2010-11, and that is the total funding going through the research councils over the spending review period, so it's over the 4-year period, 2011 to 2015. And however you talk about that figure, whether it's good, better, worse than what it could have been, what it should have been, it is a big figure. Let's not get away from that. It's a lot of public money. It needs to be used as well as we possibly can. We need to be able to account for it, and we need to be able to demonstrate how it's being used. Okay. The openness agenda. We have been talking about open access in sort of different kinds of ways for at least 8 or 10 years to my knowledge. But I think in more recent years there has been a real push from central government. And remember, the research councils, we're arm's length from central government. Nevertheless, we are part of the public sector and we do get our money from central government, so it's important to bear that in mind. And the government has a growing commitment to openness and transparency. And as part of that, we see it very much as our job to make the fruits of research available publicly so that they can be exploited. And the exploit word is always a bit difficult. Used might be a better word, so that it can be used appropriately to make a good difference to the world around us. It is seen increasingly also as part of the incentive to drive innovation and growth. I imagine won't be a surprise. We are in difficult economic times. And at the moment, actually, research in the UK, publicly funded research, is seen as part of the answer to those problems. And that's a position the Research Councils really want to defend and to take forward, because obviously we see it as part of the answer as well, and not the alternative model as it being a drain on the economy and a drain of resources that could be better used elsewhere. So it's important to us to be able to talk to the government about what we're doing for that agenda. And dissemination, as I've already said, is a really important part of that. We absolutely recognise that the research councils can't do this on our own. There are lots of players, many of whom are in the room here, who have to be part of this. It's important that the people who produce journals, be they online journals, be they major publishing houses, the people who curate journals, look after them, help disseminate them to the public, that the libraries are involved in this. The people who manage repositories need to be with us on this, and the publishers too. And that's a lot of groups with different interests and different drivers. So it is a tricky landscape to work in sometimes. Okay. So we're on that one, sorry. I've said already that the research outputs need to be available to enable exploitation and use. We have a responsibility to make that happen. We see that as part of the process that's going on. So the bottom line is, we want the stuff out there, we want it to be used, so please help us with that. Okay, that's enough about the why, I think. Let's move on to what we mean by open access policy. I don't want to run through another version of what open access is particularly, but I do want to point you all to the current RCUK policy on open access, which is on the RCUK website. It's there together with guidelines as we currently have them. There are frequently asked questions on that website, so I would urge you to have a look at that if you're not familiar with the RCUK policy. We'll say a little bit about definitions and scopes and a little bit more about what our expectations are, particularly of researchers and research institutions. And then I'll say a little bit about implementation and compliance. Okay, so the definition of open access, and it's familiar, we've had this already in various versions: unrestricted online access to peer-reviewed and published scholarly research papers. So what we mean by that within the Research Council context is that a user has to be able to read the published article in an electronic format and search and reuse the information and material in that article. And that's basically where we're starting from in terms of what we mean by open access. We do also want to have access to and technical access to the content, so that the idea that the material in your paper, the data in it, the text in it, can be text mined and used by the research community primarily, but not just by the research community, as long as there is the appropriate attribution. Obviously, we don't want people's ideas to be used without acknowledgement, so it is important that there is attribution in any licensing system that's set up. Okay, so what does this apply to? Yes, we know that there's a whole range of outputs that come from the research that's funded. Stephen's already alluded to that in terms of the ref. It's true for the research councils as well. We're interested in all the outputs of research. But we're starting in terms of open access publications, because there's a lot of things happening there and a lot of will to make this happen as well around us. So we're talking about peer-reviewed research articles published in journals or conference proceedings. they need to acknowledge RCUK funding. Now, I have to say, actually, that requirement isn't new. That's been part of the Research Council's terms and conditions of grant for a really very long time. What it has been difficult to do over the years is to enforce that policy, not least because for a long, long time, publishers were not particularly interested in putting that information in. They do now put that in, and that there's been a lot of work I know done on this by Rin, and Michael may touch on that in when he talks. There is guidance that Rin has produced onto how you can best do this. We also would like, wherever possible, that there be some statement about the ability to use and reuse content. So what do we think this means for individual researchers and for research institutions? Yes, the money side of this is really important and really difficult. Obviously, the research councils recognise that a lot of the major players in research publishing are commercial operators, and that there are going to be costs to making publications open and available at the point of publication in the world we live in now. I actually have to say, speaking probably slightly off the record, I found the talk we've just had really heartening, and I absolutely, personally think that that's a way to be going, and I would be with Stephen in categorising that type of publishing under the gold banner, if we must use those words. That said, we do recognise the need for funding. The way we tackled this, I mean, the Research Councils had a policy, or at least a position statement on open access, and individual councils had our own policies back in 2005, 2006. At that stage, the recognition that there would be a cost was met through our terms and conditions of grant, and we expected applicants for grants to bid for money on the grant and to use the FEC model to account for that money. I have to say it didn't work very well, because and we do appreciate that the FEC model that the Research Council operates, there are very extensive expectations on the indirect costs in a grant, and the fact that publications by and large tend to happen after the end of the grant meant that it was normally under indirect costs that these funds had to be allocated. I think we did hope that it would be more straightforward for institutions to start accumulating funding for publishing through this route. But I think by 2010-11 it was clear that that wasn't sufficient. And so we looked very carefully at the shift of our position to block grant funding. And that's where we are now. We have decided that we should fund this as a ring-fenced piece of activity through block grants to institutions. And the block grant funding that institutions received it's on a model that's directly proportional to the total amount of Research Council funding that institutions get. So if you have a block grant, and this reverts back to a previous comment as well, of course that means managing the money, and it means expectations that we'll be coming back and asking you what you've done with the money, and it's bureaucratic, yes, but we have to account for the money, and so that was one of the sort of checks and balances we looked into. So we would like institutions in receipt of the funding to establish institutional funds to take forward open access publishing. Many institutions get different sources of funding. Simon talked about that earlier on. And so we would hope that you could have at least a single pot of money and manage that as a single pot, as the institution sees best. Nevertheless, from the Research Council's point of view, when we ask about the money, we'll be asking about the Research Council's money, and I equally recognise that that's a burden. We expect that the primary use will be APCs. That's, I think, a reflection of living in what we see as the real world, and that the APCs we know are there. I don't think the research councils would have an issue if APCs were not the only cost that this money was being used for. Nor do I think we would be worried if there were some quite robust discussions going on with publishers. We're having robust discussions with publishers about the level of APCs. I think one of the things we are interested in doing is driving down the costs of APCs on the grounds that, and to avoid the double dipping issue in a nutshell, there is no reason why the public purse should be paying for this activity twice. This is, I think, the one place where I have mentioned colour. We do have a preference for gold open access, and that's because we have a preference for access immediately on publication. And we recognise that that may require you to pay the money. That is why we would see the journals that we've heard about as being part of gold open access, because the publications are available on publication, and that is great. So it does tick the boxes for us. Okay, so those are the expectation of institutions. If we think about the repositories now, we want things to be available through repositories. Two of the councils within RCUK have very specific requirements. If you have funding from the Medical Research Council or the Economic and Social Research Council, you are expected to deposit publications in Europe, PubMed Central, or the ESRC Research Catalogue, respectively. For the other research councils, and that includes BBSRC, though it's a slightly more complicated picture because we fund Biomed. 10 minutes left? Okay, thank you. We're about halfway through, so might get there. Okay, so on repositories, the BBSRC position is we would expect our Biomed researchers funded through BBSRC to use Europe PubMed, but we don't absolutely mandate it because we fund a very wide remit in the biosciences, and Europe PubMed isn't the most suitable repository for large parts of our community. What the repositories that are used, and I think we do see institutional repositories as having a really important role here, is that they have to be open access, of course, that's what we're paying for. And there must be some metadata in there that's searchable and usable, and there must be a way of aggregating the information and searching it properly. Now, there are a couple of projects which the Research Information Network are involved with. I haven't been close to these projects, but the research councils are involved with them. I'm not going to talk about them because we have somebody else in the room who knows the territory much better than I do. But this is just a flag that we are working where we possibly can with other interested parties in this landscape. Okay, moving on to implementation. Sorry, I'm not keeping up with taking the slides forward. I just realised that it's quite difficult when you haven't got the screen. It's there. Oh, well, I'm not technically terribly adept. Awfully sorry about that. Okay, so we're on to implementation. And this is a bit more about the how we expect these things to be working. We do have some flexibility. Or in various places in the texts that we've produced, we talk about the transition, not about this being an event. At the moment, our thinking is around a 5-year transition from 2013 through to 2018. These are things we are aiming for, and the gold word is there again. We are aiming for 75% open access publishing through the gold route by 2018, and 100% compliance with the policy which allows for open access publishing through whichever route. I have to say, these are things we are aiming for. We do think that this is a flexible position. These are the assumptions that we've built into the funding model for deciding on the sums of money to allocate and how that money would be rolled out to the institutions. They aren't strictly targets in the sense that you must meet them. They are aspirations, and they were set with the expectation of getting the thing going and setting the expectation that more and more publications need to be open access. And in fact, by 2018, it is our estimate that that ought to be a sufficiently long time for everything to be compliant with our policy. Now, it's not straightforward, and I do understand there are huge varieties between the disciplines, and that has been a really big feature of the discussions that we have in the research councils. You can imagine there are people there from 7 different research councils, all of us answerable to our own communities, and we do try to incorporate as much as we can of the input from across the research remit. So this is the sort of average position we would expect to be in by 2018. We've got some supporting guidance on the website. We've got frequently asked questions that I've mentioned before. And that does explore some of the more detailed issues around how you can comply. And some of the commonest questions we get, of course, are around what do I do if I haven't got enough money from the institution? And there are things in the guidance around that. It's around, we do have a preference for gold. If you can't pay for gold because there isn't institutional funding for that, we would allow green. If you're in that position, and in relation to embargo periods, the policy embargo periods are 6 months for the STEM subjects and 12 months for arts and humanities and social sciences. Nevertheless, there is a caveat there that if there is no money and there isn't a green route that allows you the 6 or 12-month option, there is a longer embargo period of 12 and 24 months respectively. But that has to be very much a last resort, and we would expect that to fall away over the period in question. I have said that this is a moving landscape, and it's actually moving probably even faster than we anticipated. Not necessarily completely in the direction we were hoping for, but that's c'est la vie on that one. But we are going to have a very good look at what's going on in this area in a year's time now. And that will be it will be an externally chaired and led review. We will be looking for the views of all the different interested parties, and we will particularly be coming to the research institutions for some information about how you are progressing the implementation of open access policy. And I have to say, it seems to me that here in Kent there's an awful lot of very positive stuff happening, and thank you for that. That's really very good news for us. We are also committed to continuing to review this. As I say, the landscape is moving. At the moment, we've got sort of in the back of our minds the possibility of another review in 2016 and another in 2018, but don't hold us to that. It depends on everything else that's going on. I will now say a couple of things about the 2014 review. These are the sort of, this is the range of things we want to be looking at, the scope we are setting ourselves for this review. It's quite ambitious, and as we get closer to actually doing this, it's getting a bit scary, frankly. We want to look at the international landscape. There have been questions about, is the UK being the only country here that's doing this, and therefore we are working in an international area of activity. What's the point of that? As Stephen has already said, lots of countries, particularly research-active countries, are engaging with open access, and it is the direction of travel that we're picking up. The research councils are involved in some of those discussions. There's a forum called the Global Research Council, which is a forum that brings together research funding organisations throughout the world. It operates in sort of continental blocks, if you like. The ERC, European Research Council, is part of, or is affiliated to the Global Research Council. And they have a major discussion going on at the moment about open access, and the research councils are taking part in those discussions. Coming closer to home, we want to look at the impact of the policy that we've put in place on, it says disciples here. I think we know we haven't got many of those. We mean it's a nice typo, disciplines. We want to have a look at that. We want to have a look at the issue around peer review and what's is happening in the peer review area as a result of our moving to this policy position. We want to look at, in more detail, at the question of research collaboration. We haven't really touched on that so far, but there are really big questions there around who pays for open access charges if it's a multifunder endeavour that is being published. And the answers are not straightforward on that. The Research Council's position at the moment is that we wouldn't expect more than one agency to be paying for the same costs. So when you come to account for the monies, just bear in mind that we do talk to other funders sometimes. But seriously, the money is thinly spread. But we do want to know about where the pressures are in the system around multi-author, multi-funder publications. I know that there are some institutions are talking to one another about how to manage that between yourselves, which is really, really, really helpful. Our expectation is that if there is a research council component on the publication, at the very least, the institution hosting the person on that, with that bit of money, thinks about how they're going to contribute to the cost of open access on that one. But we will be looking at into the detail of how this might be working. We want to look at the impact of licenses. As I say, our aspiration and our policy says that we are in favour of reuse of material, unrestricted reuse of material, non-commercial, because there are issues around the funding that we give. Sometimes there are very specific conditions of grant attached to individual grants that we give around intellectual property, and we've got to respect those. We expect our funded researchers to respect copyright issues and situations. But we are interested basically in how the requirements to have a license to reuse the material is affecting your ability to publish open access, to meet our policy requirements. That it's an area that is moving fast, and we want to hear from you about that. Embargo periods I've touched on. Our aspiration is that no more than 6 months, well, our policy is no more than 6 months for STEM, no more than 12 months for arts and humanities and social sciences. How feasible is that proving to be in a year's time? And the overall costs as well. When we did the modelling for this, it was very, very difficult really to anticipate what the costs would be. And we do have to remember all the time that the research councils are operating in a zero-cost environment, i.e. if we take money to pay for open access publishing, where that comes from is research funding. So we've got to have a balance there. How exactly that works through, well, we're interested in how you think it's working through. And whether, the other assumption in the model was, of course, we used the Finch figure, which is an average figure across all disciplines. And we're very well aware, I'm very well aware, particularly in the biosciences, where the individual costs appear to me to be significantly higher than the Finch average. And it is a real burden on the institutions managing a pot for all these disciplines, depending on the balance of activity in your institution. Please tell us how that's working and whether the overall costs are sufficient. I'm very nervous of putting that question to a community of researchers because nearly always the answer is no. In answering it, please bear in mind there's no new money for this. So, but we will be looking at that. And also, we will look at the costs of running block grants. That is a real cost. We recognise that. How much of a burden is it? How much staff time has had to be allocated and costed for this activity? So those are the things we want to look at. I've got a few screens on the detailed data. I'm really not going to go through them. They are quite small. They're on our website. They're part of our policy. But these are the sorts of data that we will be asking primarily the Simons of this world to provide, I think. But I know that's again, easy to say because getting hold of the detailed numbers on this, it depends who manages the budget in a given institution. Is it the librarian? Is it the finance team? And it is all about, are there good management information systems within the institution to help get these numbers together? But these are the sorts of things we will be looking at. We are quite interested in what you are paying to publishers. And that is because we need to be able to have a sensible discussion with publishers about what is being paid to them through through APC charges, for example, and what does that mean for subscriptions to those journals. Because if we are moving into a position where the journal subscription rates are not coming down and APC costs are going up, that's unacceptable to us. We need to understand how that is working. We really do understand the sensitivities in the publishing world here, and there are various fora, one of which RIN is running at the moment, where we've got all these people in the room to talk about what these issues might be and how we can implement open access to best advantage. And I think that would bring me to what is my last slide, I think, which is actually about the working in partnership piece. We do want to work with the right people. We want to hear your views about this. We do recognise that there is this real tension in what we ask you to do in this area, as in what we ask you to do in all areas, of course. We need enough information to have a good understanding of what the policies we put in place means for you as an operating organisation. And we need to do that with a minimum burden on you as a community, because in the end what we want is our research community to be doing research. Honestly, I know sometimes it may not feel like that, but that is what we would like our researchers to be doing. Nevertheless, as I said at the outset, we've put a lot of money into the system. We need good information about how that is being used and whether it's being used to best effect. There is a best practice project underway which Michael from the Research Information Network is running. The research councils sit on that group. In fact, I sit on that group for the research councils, but I'm not going to say anything more about that. But essentially, the message I want to leave you with is this is a partnership. Please talk to us about how this is working. Thank you.